Thank you so very much for setting up a scene for us. And I think that gave a very good, a comprehensive structure, and that we can use for this panel as well. So we talked about the generation, we talked about the transmission, distribution, efficiency, conservation, governance, policy, digitization, privatization, and transition. So I think that's quite a comprehensive agenda when we look at the power. But I think the most important thing, linking the power sector to the economic development. Today, even if we talk about industry or technology, everything requires a power, and they need a power which is sustainable now, because if we are getting into the export business, then it has to be something which is not driving that emission. So that's one of a challenge which we will be facing. So I think let's start with the privatization. That's one of a key area which is right now we are discussing, and we have got one great story coming from the K Electric, which is a great success story, one of the success story from a privatization. So, starting with you, the privatization, we are talking about the power sector, we are talking about other sectors as well. So, based on your journey, how you have made it happen? What were the key characteristics which managed to create KE a success story compared to many other countries or other assets which may not have a similar outcome as we see today?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Sajil. I think what was alluded to in the entire speech of Honorable Minister Saab is what actually is needed when and if you have a privatized entity. KE privatization, obviously there are sometimes there is some criticism in terms of whether it was the right privatization or not. And again, still there is an element of subsidy which is paid to K Electric, and it happens to be a higher number. But I would again plead that that is one of the factor, but probably you have to look at the overall efficiencies that have been brought into the system because of that privatization. And I would like to, the limited time space, would like to again emphasize that probably privatization is the way forward if we have to get rid of the circular debt. And we have seen in all the statements, although of the Minister Saab and the government, that they are trying to privatize or give concessions for the discourse. And I think a very tangible step towards not the power sector, but is the advertisement for the PIA. We have heard about PIA's privatization for a very long time. We have seen the advertisement, which means that there is definitely some progress which has been made. And hopefully when it is done, it is going to be some less burden on the national exchequer. In terms of K Electric, we were privatized in 2005, and obviously it was a government-owned utility. It has generation, transmission, and distribution all together, and it is a fact which has been verified by NEPRA and many other institutions that the T&D losses at that point in time were around 37.6% to be very precise. And it took us some time, but today we stand around 14% of T&D loss, which required digital, administrative, process related, governance related, all kinds of steps which enabled us to reduce these losses. The recovery, in fact, has improved substantially over these periods. And the most important thing that I would again claim that is being done is the right sizing, I would say. We at the time of privatization, we had 18,500 employees of K Electric, sir, and out of them 17,000 were non-management and 1,500 were management. It is a fact that we had more gardeners than engineers in 2005. We had telex operators while there were no telex machines. Today we are still a big company. We have, alhamdulillah, we have 12,000 people, around 6,000 management and 6,000 non-management. We hire from the best of the universities. We have digitized the entire transmission system, and on the distribution we have done a significant improvement in the overall meter data management system. We are doing the SCADA, and hopefully, inshallah, in the next few years, we'll be able to demonstrate that the entire electron can be seen on a screen. where it has gone, where it is transmitted, distributed, so on and so forth. So as a function, while obviously we have our own power plants, and those are run by gas, and because we are supplied with uh, RLNG, which is expensive, and again because government buys it, we buy from PLL. So as a result of gas, our tariff is higher. Uh, because it is a regulated entity, so we have to get approvals for whatever we do, and without those approvals it is not possible for a utility to come up with their own projects. So while we have still some distance to cover, we still have to go down to a single digit of TND loss. We have to reduce our generation cost, and recently, again, we are able to publish our RFPs for solar and wind. Almost 540 megawatts of RFPs are in the market, and we have received. It is going to be done on a digital platform, so we have some 40 institutions registered with us who fully, inshallah, who will be bidding for this, out of which 12 are foreign institutions. So we have filed a plan for the next 7 years with the regulator for almost $2 billion of capex, and the way, inshallah, I would see it happen is that obviously we'll have our own generation cost, which has to be lower, and again the plan ultimately has to be approved by the ministry. There has to be a curve for the TND and the recovery, which has to be provided to a utility, and I think all distribution companies which are going to be privatized will have to be given some targets in terms of their actual cost today and the future, and they have to then perform based on those benchmarks, and whatever the cost, you know uh, which those benchmarks are there, they have to be accounted for, and then those utilities have to ensure that they perform on the basis of those benchmarks and do better. And if we are able to do that, then the burden on the next national exchequer through this circular debt will reduce. Uh, we have seen it grow, and again, predominantly it is because of the fact that the benchmarks that are given to the distribution companies are not met. Uh, I would, again, of the firm view that if you give them a roadmap and you tell them that this is your benchmark and you have to reduce generation cost, ultimately there's going to be a market. I think we are seeing some in CTBCM in some form or the other to be implemented, and ultimately when we'll have private distribution companies who will go on a market, buy power, and then sell, and obviously the government will regulate the overall performance, overall uh, rules and procedures through which those markets have to operate. Then the government will be not having any impact on any inefficiencies in the system, which then have to be absorbed by those private companies, and then government can just do the governance part of the operations, not the operations but the policies and procedures.
No,
So
thank you, Monis, and that's bring me to Alice, up to you. Like, Monis, uh, he picked up on the open market and the market operations where the companies can decide what to buy and how to buy and where to really distribute that side. So, do you think the Pakistan in the next 5-10 year has a roadmap to really get there in terms of the open market operations or a commercial side, a competitive market somewhere?
We can, but not in a very aggressive fashion, because in the past we have signed contracts with generation companies in which we have agreed on a take or pay basis, which means that government and government is the single buyer. Those contracts have been signed. The life of those contracts is 25 years. Three major policies have decided these contracts. One was 94 policy, but the IPP set up under those will be out of the system soon. The ones which are set up under 2002 policy, we negotiated with them around 5 years ago, and we have agreed that they will move towards competitive market. But a large chunk was set up under the 2015 policy. Those are the coal-based IPPs, and those have this government has a contractual obligation to buy from them for 25 years, roughly 16, 17. So we won't be able to shift all of them. However, 50% of the generation today is in government hands, hydel and nuclear and all. So overall, we can, and I think it's time that we move towards a competitive market. We should take the first steps towards that. Um, and for that, we will have to sort out the wheeling issue, which has been long been pending. Uh, Wheeling, the pricing, which has been discussed in the past, it is not feasible to do wheeling on that cost. So how do we solve this problem? Because there is stranded cost, there are losses in the system. The government is obviously and rightly worried that the good customers will go towards, will take advantage of wheeling, and the customers in which the losses are high will remain. So how do you solve that? I think one of the two things that we need to do. One, we need to start wheeling in a way that the burden on the grid is less. For example, I'll give you one example. We are talking about stopping supplying gas to the captive plant. Captive power plants are roughly 15% of the total system. Those can easily be shifted to a competitive market or towards wheeling, because once they don't get gas, you shift them under decent wheeling charges to that. And there'll be other steps. So wheeling is one thing we need to sort out. We need to set up the competitive market, and we can start gradually shifting the consumers, the bulk consumers, and eventually the retail towards that. So in a nutshell, yes, we can shift to competitive market. Over the next 5 years, we can start, I think, in the next year or so, because the homework is already done. And over the next 5 years, we can transfer a decent demand on the competitive market. And the entire roadmap might take 8 to 10 years, which is all right. So yes, we can do it. Oh, we can do that. And I think it's time that we start taking actions in that direction.
Thank you. I think let me pick up with Rohil, and then I'll come back, Ayla, to you. So Rohil, you are working in the private sector right now. So there are certain policies and the change of policies, and then the wheeling charges issue or a transmission issue. There are many things over the period which has evolved in a certain way. So sitting in a private sector, how you see the overall challenge in terms of the shortage of electricity or transmission challenge, or attracting more investment or maintaining those plants and keeping them profitable or at least viable going forward. And let's come to that, and then we will come to the transition of that to the renewable later.
Yeah, so I think right now, as far as generation is concerned, there is absolutely no shortage of power. I think everybody knows the numbers. We have an installed capacity of something like 43,000 megawatts. In the non-summer months, it would go down to maybe 30, 35. But in the non-summer months, the demand is also less because of the cooling. So clearly no shortage there. On the contrary, because of the economic conditions and the constant raising of prices, the demand has also come down by around roughly 10%, which is not good. I mean, obviously that's a bad sign for the country. There are obviously transmission issues, but those are hurting the cost rather than availability, because, for example, if there's demand in the north and the south plants are more competitive, the cost, there are plants available in the north, but they will cost more. So it's not a shortage issue, it's a cost issue. Where the load shedding and things take place are at the distribution level. And I would say there are two types. One is, I would, for simplicity, say voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary meaning you're doing it for economic reasons because the losses are so high that you load shed to bring down your overall loss percentage. And the other one is in a lot of discos where demand has taken place in the past, the transformers are overloaded. So, and they don't have the money to upgrade them to supply that power. I think the government is taking action on both the sides, and one step would be handing over management to the private sector. So they will invest in those, the grid locks or wherever they are. And the other one is related to the voluntary ones. And there, I think there's a combination of governance, combination of political will, because in the past, whenever, for example, Monis would go and cut power, the law enforcement, instead of siding with him, would side with the people who haven't paid their bills. And also technology. Now, the technology that has come on the last 5-10 years, now it's easier to identify, the people who are actually defaulting and cut their power. rather than a collective punishment of and so on.
No, thank you. And I think just there's just a question when we are looking at energy or a power sector, we look at that something which is the matter of security, which is a matter of economic development. And at the same time, we have got a lot of pressure being a signatory to Paris Agreement, the sustainability and the transition side of it. So I like coming to you. So we have got a one roadmap that what we're going to do, what happening today, whether it's a transition, it's a generation, or it's a distribution side. Second part comes to how we are going to train our citizen for conservation side, because that's also from our habits. But right now, do you see that for the next 20, 25 years, can we commit to the entire transition towards more sustainable sources? And can we put together that roadmap and get a commitment from private sector and the government that this 25 years plan is going to stay there?
Thank you, Sajid. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Sajid, when we talk about, say, how to sort of deal with the issues of the power sector, I think we have a very clear roadmap, what the Honorable Minister said, all my fellow panelists mentioned. All those things, they are there. They need to be implemented. Now, on top of that, if you put the energy trilemma, which is energy accessibility, affordability, and sustainability, we are not going to get there immediately soon, but we have a roadmap. And whereas we have the net zero commitments, obviously different countries and different industries and regions, they have committed to either to 2030, 40, 70, depending on their own dynamics. When we talk about energy transition, we must also look at that what are our own consideration as a country, the availability of resources and where we are at. We cannot completely jump from where we are to something that does not exist, or there are lots of hurdles. Just to say, in Pakistan at the moment, what we need to do while moving towards sustainable sources of energy is also to move more towards indigenization. And there is already a move to move from, say, imported fuels, etc. But if you look at the numbers, last year's numbers were that 60% of the generation was from fossil fuels, and a huge part of that was imported. We obviously have installed our own capacities in terms of, say, the other generation that we have, nuclear, then obviously with regards to the renewable energy as well. We are still quite sort of, so I would say in the early stages of implementing or integrating renewables in the system. Now, in terms of the roadmap that you mentioned, it is extremely doable because overall the costs have really come down. And technically now it is possible. We do not need to sort of deal with issues with regards to intermittency or such, because now we have even storage solutions possible as well. If I look at 2010's number, the solar generation has come down by more than 80%. In terms of onshore wind, close to 60%. There is a lot of investment. About last year, about $35 billion of investment was done in the battery storage area. Now the batteries are getting better and better, and they're coming on board as well. So we need to sort of put everything together and see where we are moving. I'll just add one more thing here, that just integrating renewables is not about generation. We also need to look at the readiness of the grid. Globally, there is about $550 billion investment just required in the grids to integrate renewables. As of now, about 1,000 gigawatts of wind and solar projects across Europe and US are waiting to be connected to the grid because there are challenges. There is another interesting element, and then I'll sort of stop here, which is to look at the supply chain, which is at the back. Now, to move towards transition, we need to see what is the supply chain readiness, including minerals. I think we need to pivot Pakistan as a key player towards energy transition. We all are aware of the huge resources for energy transition that we have in our country. We all talk about one of the very large copper projects. So it needs to be done in an integrated manner, looking at creating policies, incentives, and you also mentioned about the adoption to also incentivize adoption. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think that's where this roadmap comes more interesting. When we are talking about 25 years from now, we don't know which kind of energy we will be using, right? Or what kind of new technologies may come in and what is the better bet. So how we can create that flexible model where private sector, investor, and the governments, they can work so closely and they are so flexible to adopt and adjust based on the changes which are happening around the world, right? So our current experiences are very, very rigid in most of the time. So how we can create that mechanism where the investor is willing to put the money because of flexibility, private sector want to take a lead, and the public sector is there to make sure that flexibility and that adaptability exists out there. So, Mohammed Ali Sahab, I'll start with you, and sir, I'll come to you as well. Minister, you want to add?
See, I think there is silver lining here, okay? And there are certain things which will work in our favor if we position ourselves correctly, and if we take put the sector in the right direction. Now, there are four things I think which will work in our favor, and those are frankly the areas where we have messed up in the past, but we can take advantage of those. Firstly, in Pakistan, we have highly inefficient appliances today. Just to give you an example, when we were working in the ministry, if we replace all the fans in the country and make them more efficient, which will happen over the next 10 years or so, we save around $1.5 to $2 billion of fuel imports every year. We run our tube wells on diesel, and we import roughly $2 to $2.5 billion of diesel every year. A number of appliances in the country are inefficient, and going forward, they will be replaced because the technology is there, firstly. Now, the second area where we can improve is we are doing our space heating and cooking on gas. We are providing gas directly in the households. That will change. So just to give you an example, 75% of oil imports that we do is used in transportation. And so we are importing roughly $6 to $10 billion of oil just to run our transportation sector. That will all go towards electrification. Thirdly, we have kept the power sector in the government hands so far. So, and fourthly, we have one of the lowest per capita consumption of energy globally. So, going forward, I don't think we need 25 years. We need 5 to 10 years, maybe 5 to 8, if we do it rightly. What will we do? There are 5 big problems we are facing. Transmission. Why don't we privatize NTDC? And that's something that we have talked about. We have a mindset where we continue to live in the status quo. But National Grid of UK is already privatized. Philippines has privatized its transmission company. We are talking about privatizing our national airline. KE, which supplies electricity to the whole of Karachi, is privatized. So let's privatize NTDC. Discos, we are already talking about giving it in the private hands. So the answer to the question, how will private sector get involved? Once you give the direction of privatization and involving the private sector will keep getting involved. Another problem we are facing is circular debt. We have already worked, ministry is continuing to work on that, and hopefully that will be resolved one way or the other. Fourth, we have very large capacity payments. So we're talking about debt tenor extension, as the minister also alluded. And fifth, we need to restructure tariff. So if we work on these 5 areas, coupled with energy transition, as I mentioned earlier, Pakistan will need 5 to 10 years, 5 to 7 years, I think, to fix the power sector. And the impact will gradually start coming. If we are sitting at 15 or 16 cents a unit today, as long as the direction is right, it'll start happening automatically. Coupled with this, we are talking about microgrids, we're talking about wheeling, we are talking about shifting captive. So the problems are known, the solutions are known. Now, if we start implementing those, you will start seeing the change gradually. And there's a lot of pent-up demand which can come from 2 areas. Number one, when we restructure tariff, industrial demand will pick up. That will create employment in the country and overall economic improvement. Secondly, a number of areas do not have access to electricity, so we have advantage over there also. So there are a number of steps which we can take simultaneously, and you will see improvement in the overall sector coming up.
No, thank you. I think Minister Saab also picked up on one thing, and that was one of our themes since morning as well. The government want to enable business more and more. They want them to come forward, and they want to build that trust, and they are taking action. Like Minister also mentioned about the privatization of PIA is a one step which was talked about, and now there is a significant step. So narrative is there, intent is there. Collaboration is one of our area where we still struggle really get the things done in a one room when the investor businesses and the policy makers, they are sitting in a one room to get them to the level where we get to the execution. We are seeing bits and pieces happening now. And that's one of a thing which we would like to explore more, how we can expedite that, particularly for private sector, power sector, which is a base for technology or industry both. So Rohel, I'll pick from your side first, the way the things are changing, evolving from a policy perspective, and as well as from an incentive perspective and the changes happening. How you see the private sector playing its role very effectively and not seeking only normally what we blame only subsidies. They are also getting in a proper risk taking and risk appetite board and get into the generation and transmission or NTDC privatization. How you see that happening from a private sector perspective? No, sir, Rohel. So I'll come to you, sir. I'll give you a closing one. So that's it. So we will give you the closing remarks there, right?
So I think if I look at the generation first, which is in the private sector, at least partly in the private sector, I think the policy is very good. I think it's over attractive in my opinion. But the reason why it's still, the reason to make it over attractive is mainly two, broadly speaking. One is that once you model in a return on equity based on a cash flow, and if that cash flow doesn't come because of circular debt, then obviously your entire calculations are out, right? So people factor that in when doing that. The second part is continuity of policy, and that can have many facets. For example, a couple of years ago, when the withholding tax on dividend was 7.5%, suddenly the government made it 25%. Now, you can't change because the return on equity is what the shareholder gets eventually. Now, if you change what he will get and still say technically I'm within the policy, you may get away legally, but obviously it shatters the confidence of the investor that you, somewhere along the line, you suddenly change the rules of the game. In addition, for example, the generation tariff with NEPRA, tried different models, cost plus, again, there's accusation both sides, whether it was accurate or not. Upfront, in hindsight now, it looks that even more. So I think the way it's now proceeding is through bidding, and competitive bidding is something with KE is also doing for its renewables. That's the way forward, where very transparent, people are bidding for it. So somebody will bid for 20% return, somebody will bid for 10, and there the market will find its place. So I think for future investments in, for example, transmission or whatever, I would say two things are important. One is continuity of policy, right? And also rules of the game should be known ahead so that there is no change as you go along. And in transmission, I'm sure private sector would come in and invest and share the burden with the government as well.
Thank you, Will. Munis, coming to you, what we can do, like you also picked up, you have seen the journey from a government organization to private organization. So what we can do better now to expedite that progress within the power sector, from a public sector as well as from a private sector, and then transmission.
I think what
one or two things, top line, these two things, if those are fixed, we will move faster, we will progress.
So I think what Raheel also alluded to, and I think we are all, I think, listening to the, most important problem is the continuity of policies and predictability with precision in terms of what is going to come. I would say that, if we are on the road of privatization. I think uh, whatever is given on the day when it is privatized, and for a foreseeable future, which in case of power sector, it is not 4 years, it is at least 10 to 15 years. The rules should not change in between. Uh, and it obviously is dependent on continuity. So I would, anyone who would be coming in to buy, whether it is a transmission asset or a distribution asset, would like to know the roadmap and how uh, the collaboration will happen. Power sector, again, as a private entity, you still have to be working with the local government. In Karachi, for example, all political parties are involved, and you have to deal with them. Provincial government, federal government, because they are our, the drivers of the policies, and then obviously NEPRA. So uh, I think if we are able to give a very clear roadmap and we give this confidence to the investors that it will not change. Pakistan is amongst the lowest per capita power consumption countries in the world. Probably the second lowest. There's only one, probably Nigeria or something, an African country. The potential is huge. Uh, the reason why we don't have this requirement, this demand, is because of a lower GDP. If you are going to grow at 4%, 4.5%, I can tell you we are going to absorb this demand very quickly. And then all the governance that is needed in distribution and transmission would really help, because we cannot continue to run the country at this low growth level. And once that happens, inshallah, I think the people who will be buying, whether it is a concession or a privatized entity, or whether it is transmission, they will have a very good business case. The one thing which, again, I think Minister Saab is also here, and this government, when we talk about something which has happened in the past and what is happening today, sometimes people think that today, because solar tariff is, for example, 5 cents, in the rest of the world maybe even less than that, but someone put up a plant 10 years ago with 15 cents tariff. So the 15 cents tariff was relevant at that day, and it was given. So today it cannot be compared with someone who is putting up a new power project, a solar or a wind, at 5 cents or 6 cents. So maybe they are making money. So let them make money, because if they make money, they will invest in the system. If they invest in the system, probably the progress will happen. So we look at India, the business have grown like multifolds. Pakistan
No,
was
definitely.
maybe in our country we see a lot of businesses struggle.
Yeah.
So I think if someone is making money, it should not be a crime. It should be better. It will create employment. We privatized banks. Look at the profits of Habib Bank. Now we have the president of the Habib Bank as finance minister. So I think we benefited from the privatization, and I think a lot of privatized banks are doing a lot better, and the government is getting a lot of taxes through their incomes.
Definitely.
And as Rohil talked about, sometimes they have taxed incomes which actually were not taxed initially, and because they made money in foreign exchange income, so they were also taxed. So this is a good problem to have, probably, if we
No,
look at it
definitely.
from that perspective.
Privatization and getting the business involved, and they make money, wealth generation, job creation, all these things are a part of the entire economy. Ala, coming to you, like, what in your view, what we can do better and which area we need to focus to expedite that adoption? Because there is a general consensus that there is a demand, and that demand can lead to the economic development as well as social uplift at the same time.
Sure, yes. Sajid, the demand is there, but demand is there at a certain price. It cannot be at a price which is very, very expensive and industry or general consumer cannot afford. I think what needs to be done is to think a bit differently and step out of the comfort zone. Giving more of all of these areas, whether generation we've already done, moving more towards the transmission and distribution, everything to the private sector. The private sector knows how to optimize utilization, how to optimize the use of the asset. I'll take the analogy of the telecom sector. There used to be a time when every telco would come in and put their own towers, and they realized we are not optimizing our assets. They bundled all of those and then gave it to a third party, which would obviously run it better at a much more cost-effective manner. And then also, now in terms of transmission, there are so many additional revenue lines that a private sector transmission company can generate by using that right away, adding more and more services. So I think that is critically important. There's a lot of investment needed in the transmission and distribution. The private sector will bring that. And with that, CTBCM needs to open up. There should be, obviously, there are the considerations with regards to losing the good customer, but the good customer, unfortunately, will go off grid because there is technology and there's pressing business case now. So now to bring down the cost and to retain, obviously, the customer, whether it is going to be the customer of the grid company or the distribution company, or of a third-party private company which is offering energy as a service. So that is very important. And I know you wanted to talk about the carbon credits as well. We don't have much time about that, but just to look at in the energy transition sort of ecosystem, there's a huge opportunity that we as a country that are so adversely impacted because of the climate change and the kind of voluntary carbon markets, the kind of sort of huge financial potential that they offer, our projects and a lot of what we are intending to do, it should be part of our roadmap. We can achieve a lot more. I do not get worried or intimidated about the challenges that we have, because the good thing is that we all understand what the solutions are and we have a roadmap. And now we need to move towards implementation. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ayla. I think the one theme which I pick up is, again, going back to the fundamental collaboration. That's what we are discussing since morning. Building trust, confidence by engaging each other and collaborating, and be flexible enough to give everybody space so they can execute, rather than creating an environment where the execution become one of a challenge. And I think some of the, again, since morning, we are seeing some of the steps which are being taken, some of the progress which is being made. And this engagement, I'm sure that will create a lot of positivity in terms of seeing those as a evidence, and the engagement itself is one of a commitment which government is making. So, Minister Sab, I'll hand over to you for the closing remarks. You asked for the candid comments from the panelists. So you had those candid comments from the panelists. They have tried to sum up certain areas which we can do in this time. But over to you, closing remarks.
I'm most grateful for their input, and we've started also using a mechanism where the companies like the CPPA have actually started engaging with all the key stakeholders to come and be part of the financial modeling and analysis, part of the policy intervention proposals that we've started making. As we speak, I think in the next couple of days, CPPA would be having their first interaction with the business leaders of the power sector as far as the wheeling policy is concerned, which is opening up of the competitive markets. I just wanted to sensitize the House of 4 or 5 other things that are happening in the power sector. One is a huge amount of idle power that is going to be inducted into the system in the next 5 to 8 years. Bhasha, Dasu, and other projects. So we would be inducting many thousands of megawatts of renewable idle energy into the system, number one. The other thing that is happening is there's a serious shrinking of the demand on the grid right now. Our demand is shrinking by unprecedented numbers. Just in the past 9 months alone, people have imported with their own arrangements more than 6,800 megawatts of solar panels into the country. Our maximum grid capacity is about 32,000 watts. Generation capacity is about 32,000 megawatts derated. So look at the scale at which, without any sovereign guarantees, without any capacity issues in the future, people are going off grid. I myself have gone off grid for over 56 agriculture tube wells that I'm doing my agriculture on. So the scale of people going off grid is also reflecting the fact that we are not producing and transmitting electricity and providing it to the consumers at an efficient cost. And that's very critical. The other thing is the tariff rationalization part. I'll just give an example. Please bear with me these 2 or 3 minutes. I was speaking to somebody in Wabda when they were presenting the possible upload, the possible first 10-year tariffs for a hydel project, over 25 rupees. There is no, the entire burden of the reservoir and the power plant of any hydel project is being borne by the power sector. Water and reservoir water being used for agriculture purposes is not an economic commodity in our country. So these are the fault lines that need to be seriously taken care of, and the power sector needs to take the burden that it's supposed to be taking. At the end, I would like to say that somebody just mentioned infrastructure sharing and how the telecom sector ultimately came to share infrastructure. Initially, it was a part of our telecom policy that you won't be allowed to share infrastructure for the first 5 years, because the people who already were in the sector and had made all those investments did not want to share it with the newcomers. So, but then as the industry grew and as competition kicked in, now it has reached a point where consolidation and infrastructure sharing has started taking place. I'm sure in the electric power sector also, there is a lot of infrastructure that could be utilized in a much more efficient manner if the private sector has it. In the end, about privatization, it's not just about privatizing the discos or giving them out on concession agreements. What would the environment be like for the next 10 years? Would the retailers be allowed to buy electricity from new power producers and wheel it all the way to the retailer and get the existing disco or the wire business out of the business? Or is this going to be a moratorium? So the regulatory framework and the policy that we are drafting as we speak will play a very important role in whether the privatization and the concession agreement would be a success or not. That is absolutely crucial. K Electric has been a good experience, but I think we have a lot to learn from the K Electric experience. The consumers could be, since we can't bring in competition to that level immediately in the next 5 years, so the regulator's capacity to take care of the consumer's interest has to be key and critical in the future. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and thank you all the panelists. Have a great round of applause for them. Thank you.